Matthew chapter 20, verses 17 to 28. Now, as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside and said to them, "We are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and turn him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. On the third day he'll be raised to life." Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus, and with her sons, and kneeling down, asked a favor of him. "What is it you want?" he asked. She said, "Grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom." Talking about service this morning. You got to love moms, right? This mother's name was Salome, and she wanted the best for her sons. So she goes right to the top and she asks for it. She knew that Jesus was, she knew Jesus quite well because she was probably his aunt, which made James and John his cousins. And she wanted from Jesus what all mothers want for their children, and that is a good future. Jesus responds in verse 22 saying, "You don't know what you are asking." Jesus said to them, "Can you drink the cup I'm going to drink?" Jesus looks right at James and John, and he asks them to think about this request. They have just heard what Jesus was going to go through in Jerusalem, and he spelled it out very clearly. Mocking, flogging, crucifixion, betrayal. But I really don't think that James and John and Salome knew what they were asking for. We know that the disciples never did really understand what Jesus was going to do when he inaugurated his kingdoms. They knew he had supernatural power. They knew he was a man of God. They believed he was the Messiah. But they believed that the Messiah would come in and use his power to overthrow the Roman Empire and put the Jewish people on top. And so it just didn't compute for them that the Messiah would come and suffer and die at the hands of the Gentiles. Even though he's already told them at this point 3 different times. "We can," they answered. "Of course we can drink this cup. That's the cup we want to drink. Being put in charge of the entire world, we'll take that." Verse 23, Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father." In Scripture, the cup represents a person's divinely appointed destiny. What God's plan is for your life. Every person that hears the words of Jesus and truly understands the gospel message, every person that makes Jesus the Lord of their life is asked this same question. Jesus says, "Will you drink the cup?" In other words, are you ready to submit your life to your divinely appointed destiny and let God run and plan your life, or do you still want control of it? When it comes to service, this is the first and most critical point. When people follow Jesus, it is almost never what they expect. Jesus calls people to a life of radical service, and usually, almost always, in a very different direction than they ever would have chosen. James and John say, "Yes, we will drink your cup." And they did. James gave up his whole life in service to Jesus. He was called to follow. And he left behind all the security and all the comfort of his father's fishing business. He spent the rest of his days living an unsettled life, moving from city to city as a traveling preacher and apostle. As far as we know, he gave up married life as well, which would have been a normal course in a Jewish life. As far as we know, he had no place that he could call home, only the clothes on his back. And he was the first apostolic martyr. We read about it in Acts 12:12. He had this amazing ministry. He was mightily used by God. He grew very close to Jesus. He wrote books of the Bible. But this was certainly not the life that he would have ever chosen for himself before Jesus called him. John had an amazing ministry. As a church planter, he was a pastor of pastors, seminary teacher, traveling preacher. He wrote the Gospel of John, which is one of the most beloved Gospels. He wrote 3 amazing letters that people just love. He wrote the book of Revelation. This man was mightily used of God, but his life was incredibly difficult. He watched all the other 11 apostles be martyred and die in violent deaths. He suffered alone in persecution and exile on the prison island of Patmos. But there's no one in the Bible that talks more about God's love than John does. Both had very different cups. Both full of joy and love and effective ministry and God's blessing, but also filled with suffering and sorrow and grief. I read yesterday a good quote that said something like, "It is God's divine mercy that we don't know what will happen tomorrow, because if we knew, none of us would ever get out of bed." The question that is posed to you when it comes to service, the question that Jesus asks of you this morning, and to everyone who claims to be a believer, is this: will you drink the cup of God's appointed future for you? Will you trust that His way is better, His ways are higher? Will you make Him the actual Lord of your life, putting yourself behind you, putting your will behind you, putting His will first, no matter what His call would be? Will you, as Proverbs says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge Him, and let Him make your paths straight?